Hi guys, welcome back to our Houdini practice hour. My name is Helge Maus from pixeltrain. It's really cool that you followed along with this tutorial series and showed me on Instagram and also on Facebook your results. I'm really happy that you like this series and I will keep it up. So thanks for all your support. In this third module, we now want to add, beside of the bristles which we've done in the second module, now our texturing, and we want to light and render our model. And so we come back now to the last step we've done with the toothbrush. And to remember what we have done here, we dive into the brush here. And you see at the end, after we have built some UVs, which are really important for the step we now do, because you can't paint and bake out later texture maps if you don't have UVs. We had then a low poly brush here, and then we built our high poly brush by making a volume, smooth it a little bit, and so on. And then we had our high poly brush here. Then we have talked about the Side Effects Labs map baker, so you can use the map baker to prepare some maps for the painting process if you like. I don't do that here because I want to show you the baking process in Substance Painter in a moment, but you can do it. And then we have written out our brushes. And on the right side here, we see the low poly brush. I used the Rob FBX here, you remember. Make sure that you have as a frame range only the current frame. You only need one still of the brush. Here's the name, and a little side note here. If you have later really complex objects with many parts, you normally want to have a little bit different naming scheme. So you would say brush underscore high then for the high poly brush, and underscore low for the low poly brush, and for every object which you have here in the tree. But this is a really simple brush, so we don't use this scheme here. But if you are interested in that, please let me know in the comments, and we will add Substance Painter in the workflow with Houdini much more if you like that. And then the same here for the high poly. So we also exported this here. And you see, I place it in $job, so in our Houdini project in a subfolder with the name from Houdini. And that's now the objects we want to work with. If you haven't followed along, which I recommend that you really do all the steps to learn how it works, but if you haven't followed along and you now want to start, I've added a Gumroad account and I offered there the files for the last project and also for this project. So if you really want to see my files, you can spend a little fee and support the project and get all these project files. So thanks a lot if you do that. But now let's switch over to Substance Painter here. This is Substance Painter, and I don't teach now everything which is Substance Painter because this is a really cool tool and you have many options to paint with, but I want to give you a little bit of introduction so that you can get your project running. So if you want to start inside of Substance Painter, you go here to File and you need a project, so you go to File New. And here you now define your new project. The first thing you always have to do is you have to load your file and you load your low poly version. So let's go here to Select. And we are inside now of our Houdini project. And here's our low poly brush, which we've generated. So load this. And then we have to make sure that we have the settings right. First thing, the template. Substance Painter is able to paint in different styles. But we want to use the classic PBR metal roughness style. So this is default and I use it here for this project. Then we have here the document resolution. We are painting textures. And the coolest thing inside of Substance Painter is that it's procedural under the hood. So if you, for example, have now a texture which is, for example, 2K, you get later a map which is 2K. But if you have now an object which has many parts and you place them on different texture sets or UDIMs, you have the problem that maybe your computer or your graphics card is not able to have so many textures at the same time in your video card memory, and then you need to buy a new computer. And the cool thing is you can switch for every texture set, and for this document here, a resolution here, for example, only 1K, You can work with this if you need. For example, now in the viewport of Substance Painter, for one part a higher resolution, you can switch this in the texture set. Or you can go later in the export dialog and say, I've painted only, for example, in 1K, 2K, but now I want to export in 8K. And Substance Painter will recalculate every brush stroke you made, every substance you placed, and so on. And you get a high resolution result from a low resolution document. That's really, really cool and useful for normal indie work. Then we have to set here our normal map format. So I switch it here to OpenGL. It depends for which platform you want to work, but in our case, OpenGL is fine. Then we can import cameras. So this is really good if you have predefined cameras, which you have later in your shot. And you have to make sure that from these camera angles, the object has to look great. And to have a control about this, you can embed into your FBX cameras and you can use them here inside of Substance Painter. But we don't have cameras, so I don't bother about this tick here. Then we have this UDIM thing going on. What is a UDIM? A UDIM means that you have more than one standard UV space. And this is a really cool technique which we use in feature film, because normally when we start with one UV set, you have to place all your UV islands on one UV set, and you only have the document resolution for this. So normally more important islands which you want to show closer need more resolution, and they have to be bigger in the UV space. And this is a really big problem if you have objects which are really complex and you have different areas where we want to have, for example, a close-up. And the cool guys at Veda invented the UDIM idea, and Substance Painter is not completely there in the moment. It can import UDIMs, so we can define them in Houdini, import them here as texture sets. This is the basic idea how a Substance Painter works, and then export them as UDIMs again. So this is the workaround. So if you use UDIMs, it will work. The only limit at this point is that you can't paint over the borders of a texture set or UDIM at the moment. So every texture set is in the moment an island. So that's the problem. But I hope that the guys from Algorithmic Adobe will add this feature in your future. And then I will also add a maintenance again. If you have exported from Houdini, for example, or for other applications, maps for your model, you can import them here with the add, but we don't have them. We bake them inside of Substance Painter. So everything is fine now. I click here on OK, and then it takes a while, and Substance Painter is now loading my toothbrush. The navigation here is the Option key or Alt key navigation, like for example in Maya and also in Houdini. Alt key, left mouse button, middle mouse button, right mouse button. Really fast rundown. There are really good tutorials about introduction of Substance Painter. Only the things we need here. Here's the layer stack. So we have an empty paint layer at the moment where we can start painting. Then behind that we have the texture set settings. Like I've said, every texture set is a document inside of the document. You have here the resolution, which you can change all the time, like I've said, and in the export you don't have the limit with the 4K. You can export 8K maps if you need. Here are the channels which we are painting. Everything is set up correctly for our PBR workflow. If you have imported maps, for example, normal maps or curvature maps or and so on, which you baked out from Houdini, you can now select here under these buttons and you can use them here. Yeah, then we have here on the right side a little texture set list. And if you have predefined materials inside of Houdini, these materials will define the texture sets inside of Substance Painter. We don't have added a material at all, and so the funny name here, 1001, means that we are on the first UDIM tile, and this name here is only there because I don't have a material associated to the mesh. So we can rename this really fast, make a double click here and say this is our brush, for example. And now our texture set is named brush, and this is the full brush here. Okay, we've done that here. Then we have here on the left side our tools like brushes, erasers, projections, fills, smear or smudge tools, and also a clone brush. Then we have here our shelf we want to work in a moment with. Then we have here our properties for the tools. So if you select, for example, the brush here, let's take a paintbrush and go a little bit closer here. you see that we paint with this brush tip here and this material. And if we do that here, now you see exactly the result you expect, that you have this tip and this material. To change that, we can use now this really long list. And because this list is so long, we have here tabs which jump to the different areas here of the settings. One important paradigm you have to keep in mind if you ever work with Substance Painter is that Substance Painter never paints with color. It always paints like in reality with material. Everything is a material. And here in the last tab here, you see the material. So this here is the representation of the material which you added to the surface. You can change the base color of the material, for example, make it red, but you see it's a red shiny plastic, for example. You can say, no, I want to change the roughness of that here, make it not rough, now it's really shiny. And you can tell, okay, the material which I paint black here means it's a dielectric material or it's a metal if you go here and make it with 1. And if you now, for example, I make the brush a little bit smaller by holding down the Command or Apple key and the right mouse button, if you now paint this here, you see you always paint with the material. You can tell now the system which components of the material you want to add to this layer here. You can say, oh, I don't want to paint with hide and metal, but under the hood, like I've said, it's always a material. So now we have painted something really useless here. Let's start now with the baking process. So for this, I want to make first this layer disappear. So go here, select it, trash bin, and then we add a layer. And we have two kinds of layers here. One is a paint layer on which you can paint, and one is a fill layer, which you use for add base materials. And yeah, we take a paint layer, and in the next lesson we will then talk about the painting process. But in this lesson, we first have to bake now our maps. What is baking? We have many cool features here inside of Substance Painter, for example, generators and mask generators and so on. And to really use them, Substance Painter needs information about the surface, the thickness, for example, for subsurface scattering, or the curvature if you want to paint with dirt and so on. And all these information come from maps. And you see these maps which it is using here in the texture set. So let's switch here back to the texture set settings. And you see these are the mesh maps which you could deliver to Substance Painter to work more efficiently with that. But we haven't baked them externally, so we have to generate them now. To bake them now, we can first go here to project, and you see we haven't got any maps inside of our project which we have generated or imported in the new project dialog. So you will see that this here will change in a moment. Then we go here to bake maps, and we are inside now of the baker. Here on the left, we have the list which maps you can generate. You see this is the same list like here. And I say none, so that I first can show you the common parameters. Here is the map size. Again, like before, it's like a document size, but this size here is not procedural. So if you ever want to export the whole thing as 8K, and you know that, you should bake also this map as 8K. So that's the reason why you have here also the 8K variant. But in our case, yeah, we never go over 2K. So I add this here, and then this here is done. Then we have to decide what is our high poly mesh. If you have, for example, a normal map, the reason why we have normal maps is that we show surface details which are not there. So we only have a low poly object, but we want to show something which we have sculpted, for example, in ZBrush or 3D Code, and these surface details we want to show. We can show them through displacement, which is named height here, or we can use this here with a normal map, which is only a visual trick, but it works fine if you're not too close to the surface. To now bake this information to generate this normal map, you need the high poly mesh with all the details, and that was the reason why we generated the Houdini version of the high poly mesh. The reason why I did it in Houdini with the volume was that I wanted to have a little bit more rounded edges and so on. So I wanted to use this detail. So this is the area where we have to tell now the Substance Painter where you find this mesh. And we click here this little icon for loading a high poly mesh, and we load it here now. And now we have defined it. And all the maps which show here this cube with a high poly here, use this now as the data generator, for example. So the normal map now looks to the difference between the low poly version and the high poly version, and from this difference it generates the normal map information, which you later can use in the rendering process. To do that, we need an envelope. What is now an envelope? You can think about that the high poly mesh overlaps now the low poly mesh. And if you have, for example, on the high poly mesh something which goes up and then down, you want to have these surface details in the normal map so that you generate the light effect on the low poly mesh. And to understand this, Substance Painter or every baker generates an envelope around the low poly mesh, and then inside of the envelope it shoots a ray between these two envelope sides and looks where are the details. And the thickness of the envelope is generated here with the max and the rear distance. So the envelope on one side is the frontal distance, and on the other side it's the rear distance. And this value here is in percentage, because here of this little tick relative to bounding box means these here are percentages. If you want to have absolute values in units, you can deactivate this, but in our case percentage is good. But if you now know, for example, in one direction you have more details than in the other, you can change this. This is something you have to play with and look into your resulting normal map to really make sure that you haven't missed something. So for example, if a detail is suddenly clipped, you know, okay, your envelope was not broad enough. If you make it too broad, you maybe have intersectings and so on. It's a topic which is a little bit bigger, so let's go on here. If you have a model which has more than one parts and you want to separate them for the baking process because, for example, of occlusions and so on, you can name them here with this mesh suffix. So then it's important that your high and your low poly meshes have this name suffix exactly like it's expecting here to know exactly which part belongs to which part. But we only have one chunk, so we don't need that here at the moment. Let's decide which maps we want. We want to have a normal map, world normal. ID map we can't bake at the moment because for the ID map we need materials on the high poly mesh which define these IDs. We don't have that, we don't use that at the moment, so we don't take this. Ambient occlusion will not do much here because of the form of our toothbrush, but I want to show you, so take this. And if you now look into the parameters, you see the normal map and the world space normal map haven't got any parameters. The ambient occlusion has parameters, and these are quality parameters. So if you have the feeling that your ambient occlusion in your model is a little bit dithered or not fine enough, you can increase here these secondary rays. Yeah, then we have the curvature map, which is important for many generators. Same for position and thickness. And after we've now ticked everything which we want, go to common. We want to have a 2K map here. Everything is fine. We test now these values here. We can now click here on Bake Brush Mesh Maps, and now you see the name here is exactly the tile or the texture set which we named. If you have more than one, you have to apply to all, but in our case we only have one. And the moment we click now here, you see the baker starts working, and more maps are now coming here into our project section, and every map which was generated is also hooked up here into the texture set. Everything is done, fine. And maybe you see that we have now here a little bit different appearance of the surface, because now you see that the normals are generated from our volume, and our volume maybe was not 100% smooth, but yeah, it's fine and it's okay here for now. And normally now I go in and check, for example, for problems. For example, if you take a closer look here to the seam, there seems to be a problem, and now you have to find the problem. To do that, we can use the 2D and 3D view at the same time. We go here and here. Okay, you maybe see our UV map which we generated. So you in the moment see the material in 2D space here and also here. And then you can start switching. Substance Painter generates maps in all these channels here. And if you want to see a channel, you can press the C key on your keyboard. And then you see, now you see the base color, which we haven't used yet. Another C shows the height, roughness, metallic, normals, and so on. And so you toggle through with the C key. If you want to go back to material, press the M key, and then you are back to material. So C for channel, M for material. But what we want to see is the baked information. And so for this, we want to use the mesh maps, and this is the keyboard shortcut B, like baked. And now if you press B, you see now the normal map here on the surface. And like I've said, you see the details from our volume here, which are now generated here on the 2D world and also here. And yeah, now you see, there is a problem at this point here at the seam. We see here a little glitch here with this seam here, and it's in the normal map. You can press B again, you see the world space normals, B again for the ID, which we haven't baked, so we see this transparency. And B here is the ambient occlusion. Like I've said, not so much, maybe here a little bit, but yeah, this shadowing is really not visible. These are the curvatures which we defined, and if you go again to B, you have the position and thickness, and then if you press M, everything is fine again. So that's the process of baking. If you now think, okay, maybe we have the wrong values here, we can go back here to Bake Mesh. And now I deactivate all the maps first, so I go to none, and the only things I want to bake are the normal maps, because there we saw the problem. And now we go back here to common, and one thing which maybe is the problem is here the distance. So we have a penetration here. This is one idea we can go, so let's test this. 0.002 and 0.002. And then we click here, bake the mesh again. Okay, problem still there, and we can also go with B here to the normal map to better see what's the problem here. We know that's on the seam here somewhere, but what I see now here is everything looks so jaggy. And the problem here is that I think I've forgotten the anti-aliasing. Okay, let's go back here. And you find the anti-aliasing here under common, and if you now look here through, yeah, that's it. You see here that we have an anti-aliasing. Anti-aliasing means that you take more samples than you need, so not for every pixel, but more than for every pixel. You divide more and then you blur it out, and this really often makes problems here at the seams. So let's try an anti-aliasing. It will take a lot longer because instead of one pixel, you divide the pixel more than one time and you bake out much more pixel. And to be on the safe side, let's take 4x4. And then I would bake all the maps again. So I click all and remove the ID map. And now if I press bake, you see, wow, it takes a little bit longer with ambient occlusion and curvature and all these things. It takes much more time. Let's see if it fixes our problem. Okay, the whole thing is done, and yeah, now you see the problem is gone. We press the M key for seeing the material, and now we are ready to start painting. I save this file as it is in the project files into my Houdini project, and then we can start painting in the next lesson.